So we'll move on to look at the samples that we have here. Now, we have two different samples, and again, as I say, one-shot samples, both of which sound, quite different. One's a full-bodied, fairly round-sounding snare. The other is quite boxy, so that we can fill in the mid-range. Before we listen to them, we'll just have a look at the processing again. Just literally more top-end boosts, really, top and bottom. We're just looking to bring out the articulation and the transient with the samples here. And bear in mind also that we're sending these post fader to our reverbs, so we want the reverb to sound quite bright as well. We're following one of the samples with a little bit of compression. I'll leave these up so that you can see it in action once we solo the samples. But again, we're just looking to add more top and bottom, bring out some of the thump and bring out some of the transient. So here we go. Here are two samples. So there you go. As you can hear, quite contrasting sounds. What may be useful to do now is solo the snare drum samples again, and we'll also unmute our two reverb returns, just so that we can hear the ambience that's being created with the snare drum samples. So here we are again, snare drum samples, but this time with the reverb returns activated. So that's really bringing our snare sound to life. Now with the, sorry, I keep doing that. Now with the snare top, bottom, two samples, and with the reverb returns, just listen now to how our snare drum sound has basically come on leaps and bounds. So I mean that's an incredible difference. I'll preview this more whenever we have the full drum mix dialed in, but I'd like to stress the point now as well that by no means does the overall drum mix depend on the samples. Now we'll get to a point later where I'll mute the close mics and just leave the samples up, and you'll hear that essentially the impact completely falls out of the drum mix. We are using our close mics, our live mics, as the basis of our drum sound. The samples are merely there to supplement the consistency, and also, as I say, to help reinforce the ambience in the case of the snare samples. But we'll get to that shortly, and you may be surprised. Just it can be quite a difference there hearing the samples, and to some listeners it may seem that he's relying on the samples totally to get his drum mix. That's not the case, and I'll show that later when we have the mix dialed in fully. Hi-hats, I'll solo it purely just so that you can hear the bottom end being dialed in. We talked about that earlier, trying to coax a bit of the snare drum out. We're not going crazy with top end boost on the hi-hat, simply because our overhead mics captured so much of the hi-hat that we're getting all the top end we need from it. I am sucking out some of the upper mids here on around 3K, and I'm also dialing out some of the low mids content just to clean up the signal a bit. So here we are with the hi-hat. I'll raise it up in volume so that you can hear it. So you can probably hear quite a bit of bottom end in that signal as a result of the EQ curve that we've used here. We're bringing out some of the kick drum and some of the snare drum. When it comes to the toms, essentially what we do normally is we cut away all the sections where the toms are not playing. Now, it is possible to use a gate, but again, with miss triggers and false triggering, sometimes it can sound a little bit messy. So I tend to cut away the sections where the toms are not playing and just leave these little regions, as you can see, where the toms do play. It works really, really well. And you tend to find as well that a lot of your tom sound, depending on how you set up your overheads, they do find their way into the likes of the overhead mics and the room mics quite a bit. So what we're looking for from the close mics here on the toms is quite literally just that impact, the smack of the stick on the skin. So I'll solo the toms. Processing wise, again, it'll come as no surprise. We're maxing out the top end, sucking out some of the low mids again in around 500 hertz, and we have a bottom end boost. Some slight compression. We're not going crazy with the compression here either, and then yet more top and bottom being added after the compressor. Not unlike our kick drum processing, some of you may have noticed that it's very, very similar. We also follow up with some limiting. Now we're maybe hitting 5 or 6 dB of limiting here as well, and that's just this particular performance was quite dynamic, and I was looking for something just to clamp it down. And as I say, we were getting quite a lot of the toms and the overheads anyway, so this was just the close mics were there just to fill in the holes essentially. So I'll solo the rack and flow. I'll see if I can find a spot actually where they're a bit more prominent, where they actually play. Is there a section here where they both play? We have one or the other, it seems, but not a section where they both play. But I'll cycle through here, and here we are with the toms. So as you can hear, they're quite bombastic sounding. They are also being sent to our reverbs, and in this particular instance, I'm sending them to the kick and snare bus as well that we talked about in the first video. Now I don't normally do that, but as I say, in this particular instance, I did. I felt that we needed a little push with the toms. So moving on to our overhead tracks, I have bussed the overheads to an aux that I do my processing on, rather than doing the same processing across 2 channels. Simply, all we're using the gain plugins here for is to invert the phase. Whenever we auditioned the overheads against the kick and snare, we found that inverting the phase on the overheads just seemed to bring just more bottom end out of our kick and snare. So that's always a giveaway that your phase is sitting correctly. So here we are with the overheads. Again, what we're doing on this occasion, just to soften some of those sharp transients, we have the Slate Virtual Tape Machines plugin. Now, we're not hitting this thing hard at all. It's just literally to take, that digital edge off the overheads, just smooth the transient ever so slightly. I'll leave that up so that you can see that we're only hitting it quite light. Processing wise, again, coaxing some top and bottom out of the overheads and following it with some compression on the 1176 emulation within the virtual mix rack. The cymbals were actually cutting through quite well, so we didn't need excessive top end boosts. If anything, we reduced some of the upper mids. Whenever the mix was up and running and we had our guitars and vocals dialed in, I just felt that the cymbals were stepping on the vocal ever so slightly. So just dipping out some of that 2.5K there that we have, and just, that's a normal procedure there for overheads. Dipping out in around 400, 500 hertz just seems to take that boxiness out. So again, we're looking for more kick and snare, so we're EQing in the right regions. And I'll leave these up just so that you can see hopefully everyone can see the meters there on the tape machine. You'll see we're not pummeling this with compression either. It's quite light. It's just catching the snare hits, just giving a bit of reshaping the transient of the snare a bit, keeping it controlled. So here we go with our overheads. So there we go. Just listening back to that there, I thought that maybe the cut that we're doing on the mid range there could have been slightly higher. I was just hearing a little bit of boxiness, slightly higher the frequency spectrum there. So that may be something that I would return to if I was remixing this track. So that's our overheads. As you can see, the processing isn't too extensive on the overheads. We captured a really good sound at the source, and it seemed to work well. I do believe while we tracked these, we did have a pair of distressors over the overheads, maybe hitting 3 or 4 dB as well, and that was just adding a little bit of grit to the sound as well, leveling out the snare drum ever so slightly. So that also would explain why maybe we didn't have to do too much processing in the box. Okay, finally, our room mics, as I say, a pair of Neumann U87s, and again, what we're looking for here, quite literally bringing out the bottom end. We've got loads of top end on our mix, I think you'll agree. So we have, with our compressors actually bypassed here, we're not using the compression, just quite literally a little boost on the low mids, and I think it was the same on the second mic. Yep, pretty much. So I'll solo the room mics and let you hear what they're doing. Bear in mind now, as I say, this room in question doesn't have a particularly long ambience. It's I wouldn't say it's claustrophobic, but it's certainly, it's a nice compact room sound. It's quite bright and quite reflective. So here we go. I'll solo these up with the processing engaged. Yeah, so it's a nice room capture. It's it's doing a nice job there of capturing a nice aggregate picture of the kit. You can hear everything there, and as I say, as I mentioned before, normally your room mics are geared towards picking up kick and snare, but more than likely it'll pick up one more than the other. And as I'm sure you can hear there, we're getting plenty and plenty of kick drum. So that's why we're dialing in some bottom end just to bring it out further.